Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Coding and Philosophy podcast. I'm here with Tri.
I am Tri, and I'm here with Juho.
Yeah. And this time we're going to continue our, discussion. Last time we talked about user stories.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, we talked about the sprint planning sessions.
The planning session.
And this time we're going to top it off, the cherry on top, the retrospectives.
The retrospective part of the Agile methodology.
Exactly.
It concludes the end of the sprint, isn't it?
Yeah. So I can tell from personal experience while working as a developer. So we would meet up, we would have the sprint, which lasts for 2 weeks. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, we would have a retrospective day, which basically meant we would spend like maybe 3 hours just discussing all things that what did we do well in the sprint and how could we improve the next sprint. So basically that's the attitude that everyone should have is, okay, we just, we managed to get through the last 2 weeks. How can we make the next 2 weeks better, more efficient, more bearable, more fun? Any improvement ideas. That's what the retrospective is there for, is to analyze and figure out an action plan.
Mm-hmm. Figure out the action plan for the next sprint. Have you ever in that position that your team, the dev team, didn't manage to produce the actual feature? Then if there is, what would be the retrospective day about?
Well, the retrospective, we would discuss why weren't we able to produce that feature? And usually the answer was found in the actual sprint planning session, where it wasn't maybe a developer overestimated or underestimated the size of the task.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big reason. Or the second one was maybe you would find the answers on why you weren't able to deliver a feature usually in this planning session. Usually. But also there's a lot of unexpected things that happen during the actual sprint. You find out that this perfect plan that you were going to follow isn't actually working. So you have to improvise. And there was also, I would say you have to be flexible with those.
With those? What are those?
Oh, those. Oh, I mean with the tasks or what is with the definition of done.
With the definition of
yeah, so you have a task and
right. You can consider a task whether it's done or not by changing the definition of what is done.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But considering that we can always break tasks into smaller and smaller and smaller components, and then we set a point to call that it's done at the sub problems, then we can always manage to produce that we managed to accomplish this as a part of the whole big task.
Yeah, as long as the user gets value out of the problem that is solved, or as long as the user story is resolved somehow, I would say.
Oh, talking about user value, is during the retrospective day, do you evaluate the user it's getting the value from the product? Ever that kind of discussion happens? Is it ever in the retrospective day you discussed about whether or not the user is getting value? I don't think so, isn't it?
Well, it's out of the scope because you can use the retrospective for it's like a multifunctional thing, but the idea that the original idea is that, okay, we had...
sprint, isn't it?
Yeah, so the whole sprint,
The scope is...
how can we improve the next sprint, basically?
How can we improve the next sprint?
So that's like the way we practically did it is that we had these 4 questions or 4 like boxes,
4 boxes.
and we would put like notes on each of these boxes, and we'll spend like 10 minutes, thinking up and putting these notes on this. And the 4 boxes were what went well during the sprint, what didn't go well,
what didn't go well.
Yeah, and what did you learn, and how can we improve? How can we improve the next sprint? Don't quote me on 100%. There's like different questions you can ask, but I think those are pretty good questions to ask. So, yeah. And then we would just put a bunch of these notes on each of these boxes and then analyze that, okay, hey, we should, when we are, for example, setting up the time for a task, we should rather underestimate it rather than overestimate it. No. Yeah, overestimate it rather than underestimate it, because that will give us more room to work with, in a way. Just as an example.
And talking about that, do you see throughout all the retrospectives, do you see a commonality of what your team particularly do well and what particularly didn't go well? Is there a commonality?
One of the problems that comes to mind was getting a definition of done. And when I mean getting a shared definition of done, because the tasks were often very ambiguous, or they were left. There was a lot of room for interpretation, in a way.
Shouldn't that fall underneath the user stories? If the user story is satisfied, then it is done. If not, then it is not done. Do I got my understand correctly?
Exactly. But that's the part where the ambiguous user story is coming, because how much value is the user supposed to get from this? It's not, it's kind of left, or it was left kind of vague on purpose in a lot of ways. Oh, like the reason was that we worked in a pretty small team and we didn't have that much time to do the planning, and we, a startup, we have to produce or output, So, and you have to do stuff fast.
You prioritize having a functional software.
Exactly. So that...
and that's not an excuse of having a cowboy coders. The person who just keep on producing code without quality testing.
Yeah, well...
But that's just another discussion. And so the one common problem you notice is lack of a share of definition of what's done. Is there another problem you notice, or is there a common positive attributes that you noticed?
A positive, like something that we often did well. I think we did really good on communication. That was like a big thing. I remember at first we had a problem because we were working remotely as developers, and it was really lonesome. But then we had this idea that, hey, let's use the Slack channel. So we would just all be in the Slack channel, like with our mics on, and anytime you wanted to ask a question, you would just unmute yourself and say, hey, I was thinking about this. And it really, once we kind of implemented that, it really helped with the communication. So that was a big realization that we made.
in realization of such a problem in communication, does it derive from a retrospective?
Yeah,
Yes.
it does, because
What happened during that particular retrospective that you find you guys are having communication problem and suggest for the solution?
if I recall, we were discussing how there wasn't enough communication between the developers going on, and that often like led to sometimes features would be worked on, or some irrelevant work was being done because of
That's the opposite of agile. That's the
Yeah.
thing that agile methodology is trying to eliminate, to be exact.
Exactly. So that was a problem sometimes, and yeah, we were just kept asking ourselves like, how can we communicate better? How can we increase our communication? And yeah, then I don't specifically remember how it came to be, but we just opened the Slack channel and just we were always on there. Just oftentimes we wouldn't even say anything, but just the barrier to send a message to someone, you know, it's pretty high. But if you can just click a button, you know, unmute yourself and ask a question, it became a lot easier.
It becomes a lot easier. So the solution your team was able to propose actually eliminate any barrier and facilitate communication. That's a good proposal and perhaps a good practice for the entire team.
Yeah.
So I can immediately see the effect of a retrospective day in practice, which is your team were having find difficulty in communication, and with the retrospective day propose solutions to work around that, and which is the having a common Slack room where everyone can join in, mute their mic. Should any voice needs to be heard, they just unmute and talk out loud.
Yeah. And we also used the retrospective as a way to kind of catch up with the team. Or like you could also share any, you know, any nice things that happened to you during those 2 weeks, which is, that kind of sharing generates trust.
Sharing generate trust. Can
Yeah.
I share you something? Can I share with you something on a retrospective? What I have heard, a crazy idea. Hear me out.
Are we?
Have you ever thought of 3 spaces instead of 2 or 4 spaces?
3 spaces?
Yeah, in JavaScript you have two space indentation, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought of 3 spaces?
No. I'm gonna be honest, I'm really lost. Indentation?
Indentation, the tab.
Yeah.
So by convention we stick with 2 spaces indentation for JavaScript. But my proposal is have anyone thought of 3?
Well, not until now.
Not until now.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Your team will hate you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But please go ahead. It's a way to share with your team about how you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's really a successful retrospective comes from, well, first of all, and I would also equate good leadership is also a part of a good retrospective, because people should be able to speak their mind. There should be like let's say, a sense of calmness during the whole event. It shouldn't be any. It should be as relaxed as possible, and that's, well, it's up to the leader to make sure that that environment is.
Talking about the leader, who's often the organizer or moderator of the retrospective day.
Yeah. Well, can you reframe your question, or like reframe it?
Who is the person in charge and leads the retrospective day?
Well, we had it the product owner.
The product owner.
Or like, we didn't really have a person in charge. We would just, and I don't think you should have one. We would just talk, you know, openly and honestly about what just happened during the last 2 weeks. I don't think there should be even authority during the retrospective.
I think there should be a person who moderate the discussion, otherwise it can be an ever-expanding mirror board.
That's true. You should time box it, and you should focus on the relevant things. You're absolutely right. But when I say that there shouldn't be a person in charge, there shouldn't be someone saying like, Tri, now you tell me what did, like there shouldn't be this, I don't know, the hierarchy should be as equal as possible, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That does make sense.
But with that, we've just reached our end to the podcast. And this was a nice discussion.
Yeah, the 3-part series about Agile has really become fruitful.
Definitely.
I learned a lot during the process, actually.
Yeah. Okay, we will say goodbye to you guys and see you next week.
And remember, keep on sprinting and coding.
And philosophizing. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.